Hunting or Bust, The Journey Onward by Master Atlan, Chapter 28, Iron Soul. Tantan, you okay? Huh? The bunny-haired girl blinked the sleep out of her eyes and looked up to see the rest of her team stopped in the hallway to check on her before the next class. She rubbed her tired eyes and yawned before giving her friends a reassuring nod. Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little sleepy is all. Kiba scoffed. A little? You were switching from awake to out cold every few seconds last class. Teacher almost caught you several times. Didn't get enough sleep. Naruto nodded. Yeah, what happened? I mean, you two came in pretty late last night, but you went to bed. What happened? I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. Her team looked at her in surprise as she smiled and rubbed her eyes. I was too excited or anxious, but I'm really looking forward to the sparring class today. Tenten just smiled and headed to her next class before they could say anything else. Kiba just gave a small shake of his head before following after her. Naruto stepped over to Sasuke and asked, "What happened last night?" She got what she wanted. Hunting. The first years made their way into the amphitheater and filled up the bleacher seats as Glinda made her way to the center of the stage. The headmistress deputy quickly started setting up the arena before putting her feet together and addressing the masses. Greetings, students. Welcome to the last class of the week. As usual, if you get called up to spar, grab your weapons and set up your scroll to connect with the school's Wi-Fi. If you can't spar today, just present a note or a reasonable excuse why you cannot, and we will move on. Now, the first match. Excuse me, Professor. Goodwitch and the other students looked over and gave their attention to Tenten as she stood up and raised her hand. Glinda looked up at the girl to try ignore all the stares and attention she was getting before answering. Yes, Miss Tamura. I'd like to volunteer for the first match. Glinda nodded. Very well. Anything else? The teenager took a deep breath before nodding. Yes, I'd like to challenge Pyrrha Nikos. Pyrrha sat up in surprise and looked back at Tenten in bewilderment as other students around the room muttered and talked under their breath. Glinda merely looked towards the redhead in question. Miss Nikos, do you accept this match? Pyrrha stuttered, blindsided by the sudden request. However, as quickly as the young lady was stunned by the request, the experienced warrior took her place and agreed to the challenge. Of course. Very well. The first match shall be between Tenten Tamura and Pyrrha Nikos, Goodwitch stated as she started typing up on her scroll and bringing the two girls' profiles up on the screen. Grab your weapons and proceed down into the arena. Tenten and Pyrrha silently stood up and made their way down the stairs to retrieve their weapons. The others watched their friends leave before quickly looking between each other for answers. Wai shook her head and looked like Noctix. What is she doing? Why is she challenging Pyrrha again? Doesn't she remember what happened last time? Naruto shrugged nervously and spoke anxiously to the probing Harris. Don't look at me. I have no idea what she's doing. Well, maybe she just wants to see if she could do better. Yang suggested unsurely with a shrug. I mean, what else could she be doing? Ruby stood out of her seat and jumped a few rows forward before plopping down on her seat and smiling. I know what she's doing. They looked at the hunters in training in confusion before Sasuke looked back at them. She's destined to see how much better she can do now that she has what she needs. The others looked at them in confusion. What? She did it? Nora asked excitedly as she and Rain joined the other two in the front seat. The excited Ginger looked to her two friends expectantly. She really did it, didn't she? And we missed it! She exclaimed in anguish as she threw her hands up before slumping in their seat. How did we miss it? You said you were hungry and you and Rain went out to get burger. Oh yeah. Oh wait. John asked, what are you guys talking about? Rain hacked his thumb towards the stage. Just watch and all shall be explained. What if that didn't hook them in? The group of friends quickly dropped down in their seats and gave their whole attention to the stage. Everyone watched as Spear walked out with her weapon at the ready, and Tenten followed not long after, a stick bag secured to her back as she walked out with the focused stare on her face. Pyrrha spared her a look back and slowed down, so she was walking beside her. She was nervous and hesitated to inquire her friend's strange behavior and request for a fight. The redhead champion asked shyly, Tenten, are you okay? Did I do anything to make you mad? Tenten looked at Pyrrha and quickly shook her head. No, absolutely not. You didn't do anything at all, Pyrrha, the bun-head girl said as she rubbed her eyes a little to get some focus back in them. I think I'm just tired and anxious and probably a little bit cranky too. I could use a nap. Oh, Pyrrha gave an uncertain hum of acceptance. All right. Pyrrha, and they stopped in the center of the stage before they needed to separate, and Tenten looked firmly at the Mistral champion. Can you please do me a favor? She nodded. Of course. I really don't know how this fight is going to go, if it's just going to be the same or if something changes. Tintin firmly locked eyes with Pyrrha and stated, but whatever happens, please don't hold back. And Pyrrha was surprised by Titan's request before she turned around and walked over to her side of the ring. Pyrrha slowly stepped back into her place before their scrolls connected to the screens and mirrored the displays. Glinda stepped out to stand between them and prepared to call the fight. The audience in the bleachers went deadly silent as they prepared for the unexpected rematch. Glinda turned between them both. Are you both ready? Pyrrha pulled Milo and Aqua from her back and secured them to her arms as Tintin remained still and clenched her fists in anticipation. Glinda stepped back. Ready? Begin! Pyrrha immediately went on the offensive and charged towards Tintin, planning to catch her before she could make a move and hit her hard. However, Tintin had quickly jumped back and started to run along the circumference of the stage to keep her distance. Pyrrha quickly stopped and watched as Tintin cradled her arms together and kept focused on lapping around the stage. Pyrrha narrowed her eyes and shifted Milo into its rifle form. She quickly raised it up and in a split second fired to cut off Tintin's rod. The Noctix fighter came to a halt and looked up to see she was in Pyrrha's sight. She quickly turned around and covered her back in metal to protect herself from Pyrrha's shot. The round bounced off her back and Tintin gathered the surplus of knives she created under her sleeves before grabbing one. Here it goes. Ha! Tintin quickly turned around and twisted her hand to toss a knife at her. The moment the first projectile flew from her hand, she immediately chambered her arm again and pulled another knife out of her sleeves to throw. In a matter of moments, Tintin started to unleash a rapid stream of knives at Pyrrha like a machine gun. Pyrrha tried to parry and divert the onslaught of knives, but found the blades coming faster than she could move to block them. So she quickly ducked behind her shield and listened to the pointed weapon's scrape and bounce against Aqua like hail against the roof. Tintin kept her attack before she had thrown the last knife she had made. She sprinted across the stage as quickly as possible and jumped across the field of discarded blades laid across the floor and surrounding Pyrrha's escape. Tintin turned in the air and kicked out to land a drop kick against the sturdy shield as a resounding clang went through the room. Pyrrha deepened her stance and forced Tintin back as the bun-haired girl flipped and skidded on the ground. Her feet slid across the stage and the knives below her were knocked up and into her reach. She grabbed them out of the air and quickly threw them to put Pyrrha on guard before gripping two in a reverse grip. She raised her arms up and brought the knives down to catch the top of the shield as Pyrrha buckled in her unbalanced stance. She tried to steady herself but couldn't find a proper foothold with the threat of slipping on a knife on all sides. Pyrrha had panicked for a moment before her instincts kicked back into gear. The redhead narrowed her eyes and slid her feet along the floor and moved every knife out of her way. The champion shifted her weight and moved to the side, forcing Tintin off of her as the bunny-haired girl stumbled before finding her footing. The two students started to dance and move around the field of blades as they stepped between the empty space around them. They traded swings and blocks as they instinctively avoided the knives around them until they came in handy. Tintin would counter and slash against Pyrrha's sword as she rapidly kicked another knife up and kicked it towards the champion. Pyrrha spun the blade in her hand and deflected all of the projectiles as she stepped forward and swung her shield out to knock Tintin's block off. And Tintin leaned back to avoid the hit before doing a series of backwards hand sprints to get some distance. Pyrrha tried to chase after her, but the Noctix member threw her knives up when she was upright and forced the champion to block. Tintin started to cartwheel and pick up knives off the floor to keep Pyrrha at bay long enough to consider her next action. To Tintin's credit, the constant movement and field of weapons was a good plan to execute. Keeping a good distance away from her foe and forcing them on the defensive by tossing knives their way would work against mostly anyone. Unfortunately for her, Pyrrha was her opponent. Deciding not to stay on the defensive anymore, Pyrrha raised one hand up in the air and slammed on the floor, causing all of the weapons around her to get knocked back with incredible force. Tintin had to quickly raise her arms to guard against the chance a stray knife might hit her before she felt one slam into her forearms. She separated her arms and knocked the knives off of her before spinning in the air and kicking it out towards Pyrrha. The redhead got sick of guarding and charged after the knife, moving her head at the last moment to let the blade sail by her ear. Tintin's eyes went wide and she wanted to guard in the air, but Pyrrha leapt up and landed a spin kick into her sternum. Tintin was sent flying and crashing further across the stage as Pyrrha landed on her feet and the knives finally clattered over the floor. Tenzin quickly clambered up to her feet and kept crouching on the ground as her brown eyes locked with Pyrrha's emerald and stayed frozen. Pyrrha waited for her to get back to her feet as Tenzin assessed her options. The aura-constructed knives around them started to crack and deconstruct into particles before disappearing completely. Tenzin spared a look up at the screens and saw her aura meter had gone down a fair bit after all of that, taking a sturdy kick to the chest, and being unable to assimilate the knives back into her aura had put her at a disadvantage. Well, no time like the present. Naruto and the other spectators looked on in shock after Tenten and Pyrrha's impressive showing so far. The Whiskered Boy stared in slack-jawed amazement before a quick chuckle and smirk came over his face. He smiled even wider and looked at the others. Did you see that? That was awesome! She was awesome! Wise gave a surprised nod of agreement to his uncouth statement. She is certainly faring better than the other day. You ain't seen nothing yet, Ruby bragged before she pointed at to the stage with excitement. Look! Tenten reached behind her and slowly pulled the zipper down the side of the bag. On her back, her fingers dipped in and slowly pulled out the weapon she had painstakingly focused on creating over the week. She pulled them out to reveal a pair of silver white sticks with spotless sleek shine to them. One end of both batons was pointed while the other end was flat. Tenten barely lowered both sticks to her side and spun them in her hands to get accustomed to their feel. She stood still and focused on Pyrrha as the redhead looked at the new weapons in confusion. Sticks? Blake questioned as she looked at the new pair of Extrema in the Noctix girl's hands with intrigue. Nora excitedly moved in her seat and looked at the younger girls inquisitively. So that's what she settled on. She didn't like a hammer idea. Ruby shook her head. Didn't work for her, but she felt way better working with those, and I helped. The young leader of Ruby proudly proclaimed at her involvement. Well, let's see what your super creator can do. Nora jumped to her feet and cheered. Go, Pyrrha! Woo! Like hell. Kiba jumped from his seat and called out, "Come on, Tenten, you got this!" Soon enough, everyone was either jumping out of their seats or cheering for one of the combatants to win. Glinda stayed and weighed off to the side and rolled her eyes tiredly behind her spectacles. Goodness, it was like a preview of the commotion and madness to come during the actual tournament. However, she was rather interested in seeing how this match proceeded. Obviously, Tenten had taken her advice from the last bar and spent some time thinking up a strategy and creating a weapon to give her movements more focus. Not to see how she handled the rest of this match. Tenten actually reached down and moved the strap to her bag off of her chest and over her head as it fell to her side. She no longer had anything pressed on her or limited her movement. Tenten took a deep breath through her nose, a long exhale through her mouth, and sprinted at Pyrrha as quickly as she could move. The champion lowered her stance to prepare her defenses as Tenten's arms crossed in front of her chest and had her sticks at her shoulders. She came at Pyrrha's shield furiously as she released the rapid series of strikes with both sticks, swinging each with the full turn of her hips and didn't let up for a moment. Pyrrha struggled against the continuous hits and noticed the intense focus in the bun-haired girl's eyes. Pyrrha's eyes widened and she blocked the strike against the sticks with her sword and turned her hand to catch the back of the baton. Before Tenten could pull back, she brought her arm down and locked Tenten's arms in before she could move back. The redhead quickly brought her leg up and started kneeing the other girl in the gut before she separated and kicked Tenten back. The brunette stumbled back before quickly righting herself and gripping her sticks tightly. She charged forward and met Pyrrha's advance as the two started exchanging strikes with incredible speeds. Tenten's sticks blurred and struck with incredible swiftness as they bounced against Pyrrha's blade. The champion proved just how capable she was as she made up for the fact that Tenten had two weapons by blocking both with a much quicker, experienced move. Pyrrha would parry one baton before blocking and knocking the other back with her shield. The redhead pressed forward and Tenten answered in kind when she chambered her arms before striking. The champion thrust her blade forward and Tenten crossed her sticks to block against it. The Noctix girl exposed herself and dashed forward at Pyrrha to attack again. The redhead holstered her shield to her back before raising her hand up to repel the baton before they made contact. Except Pyrrha yelled as the harness came across and struck her head. She was stunned by the attack and couldn't properly guard against the strikes that followed after. The champion's head jerked back and forth from the baton strikes before the two sticks locked around her wrist and pulled her forward. Tenten kicked her leg out and flipped her so Pyrrha landed on her back before she immediately rolled and landed in a 3-point stance. The whole room was silent. That action, unexpected but impressive. Pyrrha remained close to the ground before slowly standing up and catching her breath. She turned around and focused back on Tenten, who was also panting lightly after the rush of attacks. While most people might be rattled and angered by what just happened, Pyrrha was merely confused and replayed what had happened in her mind. She knew she had activated her polarity, and it should have forced the harness back before it even came close to her. So why? Unless carbon fiber. The amazed look. The Amazon looked up at Tenten in surprise when she spoke up. The brunette looked between her weapons and shook her head. No metal in either of them. She had made a weapon without using any metal in it, and she felt the need to inform her of that. Did she figure out her polarity? Was she bragging? No, not at all. The matter-of-fact tone in her voice just wanted Pyrrha to be aware of that. Why? But whatever happens, please don't hold back. An excited smirk came over Pyrrha's face as she realized what Tenten was doing. She was making the fight even. She didn't want Pyrrha to keep wasting time to see if she could manipulate the excrement before they hit. This was what she wanted. A fair fight. Pyrrha lowered her arm and felt her shield slide down into place along her arm. Her smile became infectious as a similar one came up on Tenten's face to see the fight was still going. The redhead questioned, And are there any more surprises I should be looking forward to from you now? Tenten smirked and shrugged. I've got a few. She pressed the button beneath her grip as the length of the baton started to glow red. Tenten yelled as she brought one down on the floor and created a burst of fire that nearly hit the Juniper warrior. Pyrrha somersaulted out of the way and let her sword shift into the javelin before tossing it at Tenten. The brunette was able to knock the weapon off course and charged towards Pyrrha to strike again before it came back, but Pyrrha merely whipped the shield towards Tenten as the stick user raised her defenses and grit her teeth to bear through the pain. She pressed forward, but Pyrrha had quickly stepped in, caught her shield, let the momentum of its return knock to the ground, and landed on her back to handprint and kick up into Tenten's chin. And she fell on her back, and Milo returned to Pyrrha's hands as she pressed the attack to her foe again. Tenten turned on the ground and slammed her stick down to create a burst of fire between her and Pyrrha for separation. She clambered onto her feet and quickly made swipes at the warrior as she leaned and dodged out of the way of the strikes. She raised her shield and blocked the batons as they released bursts of fire and heat with each impact. The stick user yelled and brought them both down on the shield as they exploded and forced both girls to gain some distance before they continued. The red glow slowly receded and faded from the batons as their fire effects wore out. Tenten spared them a look and scrunched her face in annoyance before twisting the handles as they made a click and pressed the button again. A faint blue glow and the sound of crackling ice settled over the sticks as Pyrrha narrowed her eyes. The redhead quickly went on the offensive and thrust her javelin out to strike Tenten's head as the bun-haired teen leaned out of the way. Pyrrha spun on her feet and started throwing wide swipes at Tenten with each turn and forcing the girl to backstep away. One swing nearly struck her temple, but Tenten took the chance after ducking and lunged forward to poke the shield with her stick. Ha! Clink! A sheet of ice formed around the center of the shield where the baton hit as Pyrrha looked down in shock. Tenten jerked the shield on Pyrrha's arm and forced her hold off of it before the ice broke and Aqua flew off of the side. The Noctix fighters quickly stepped in and started waving her baton around to hit Pyrrha, but the redhead quickly parried this and struck every hit hard and fast enough that the ice didn't even get the chance to form on her blade. And Pyrrha's sword clashed into the batons and flanks of ice broke off the baton with each hit. Tenten slammed the batons together as they created a sound of settling ice before she whipped them forward and made a cloud of frozen air, blocking Pyrrha's vision. The Noctix fighter spun the stick in her hand and slammed it on the floor to freeze the ground and force the champion back. Pyrrha jumped back when she saw the sheet of ice start to form at her feet to try and restrict her. She skid back and looked up to see Tenten spinning the sticks in her hands before they suddenly stopped with the flat ends out. She raised them up and locked the ends together before they connected together. Tenten smiled as she started spinning her new staff around in her hands while the crowd cheered with excitement. Its grima that connected into a pointed bow. And Pyrrha smiled with anticipation as her sword extended and shifted into its javelin state. She stood back up and spun her javelin around before holding it along her arms and off to the side. Tenten stopped her show and gripped her new staff tightly as she lowered into a stance, the dust still giving the weapon a blue tint at the ends, and they stared at each other down. Tenten jabbed forwards and Pyrrha spun her javelin to parry its side and pushed it away. She quickly recovered and spun the staff in her hands before swinging, jabbing, and swiping and striking at the champion as Pyrrha returned her attacks in kind. The ice dust would release bursts of cold each time the weapons clashed but could not get a proper hit in as Pyrrha pulled back and struck faster than it could settle. The champion seemed to gain the upper hand with the mid-range battle as her javelin flashed and moved with incredible speed. Tenten watched as Pyrrha turned and threw the javelin forward with the extra point of its jets. The bunny-haired girl twisted at the last moment and knocked the spear off, of course, before it could hit. But as it flew off, Pyrrha came running up and threw a punch out to strike Tenten's cheek. But there was a resounding echo as Tenten covered her cheek with metal to cause Pyrrha a tinge of pain through the aura guard of her fist. The brunette tried to knock her legs out with a quick strike, but Pyrrha blocked it with her shin guards before they could freeze. The Juniper champion grabbed the staff by Tenten's hands as the two started struggling and fighting for control of it. They yelled and pulled between each other as their feet danced around and tried to unbalance the other. Knives started flying out of Tenten's sleeves to hit Pyrrha, but the redhead avoided them by shifting out of the way while pulling on the bow. Tenten swung the staff out to their sides as she and Pyrrha spun around until their backs touched with the staff over their heads. The bunny-haired girl yelled and bent forward, forcing Pyrrha off of her feet and causing the champion to roll off her back and land in a stumble in front of Tenten as her hold on the staff slipped. The Mistral champion had to flip back before Tenten could land another strike and hit her with the ice as Pyrrha gained some distance. There was a light hum as one end of the blue glowing staff started to fade before the other end faded as well. The ice dust powered it had finally run out. Pyrrha stood up and held her hands out as Milo flew back into her hand and shifted into a sword. Tenten stood out of her fighting stance and eased her shoulders as her staff hung in front of her, patting lightly. The weapons enthusiast twisted the handles again and pressed the button as the staff took on a yellow glow with an electrical crackling. She placed one foot forward and raised her brow, challenging towards the champion. Pyrrha responded with an excited smirk and her shield instantly flying up to lock onto her left arm. Pyrrha slowly raised her shield as her blade lowered behind her, fingers drumming the handle. Tenten lowered her stance again, a foot in front as she raised her staff up as it pointed towards her in expectations. The only sound between them was the crackling of static over the staff's tip. Tenten jabbed forward, and Pyrrha's shield raised to meet it, a sparkle of electricity dancing over the surface of the disc. The Nikos girl pushed the point aside and started pressing forward against the Noctix female, feeling a faint shock run through her hand after every strike, but mostly protected by her aura. Tenten pulled the staff down her grip so she could shorten the length and better counter against Pyrrha's swift sword strikes. She quickly centered her hold on it again and spun it quickly in her hands, the electric shock over the weapon creating a yellow glow to the move that kept Pyrrha at bay. For only a moment before Pyrrha shoved her shield forward and stopped the staff movement quickly, causing Tenten to trip backwards from the quick intrusion. Pyrrha ignored the faint sting that covered her arm's muscles. She quickly stepped forwards and swung her blade up, knocking the two batons apart at the point they were connected and separated the staff completely. Tenten was blindsided by the attack and trying to regain her composure before the shield struck her gut and felt a shock go through her aura. Pyrrha spun around and swung the blade up into Tenten's chin, knocking her off her feet and up into the air as the resounding tone echoed through the room again. Tenten landed on her back in a groan as the lights came back and illuminated the darkened room. Both girls were huffing for air after their intense spar session as Glinda walked out onto the stage again. She nodded towards both girls but referred mostly to the girl that was still standing. I think we've reached a good stopping point, and I must say, you both have performed very well. Pyrrha took a moment to catch her breath and relax as her shoulders slowly slumped. The warrior holstered her shield and sword to her back again before looking up to finally pay homage to the screens. Tenten was obviously in the red considering the match had ended after she had landed that hit on her chin, but Pyrrha immediately noticed that her own bar was just barely over half, maybe 60% after the match had finished. That was the most she had lost in a fight in a very long time, even more than when she had her fight with Sasuke before it was interrupted. Pyrrha's heels clicked against the floor as she stepped over to Tenten's side and looked down at the lying girl. Tenten's breathing calmed down as she opened her eyes to see the older blonde standing over her quietly. The stern woman's face didn't falter as she offered her hand to the young woman. That was a spectacular showing, Miss Tamura. Tenten looked at the offered hand before taking it as she she was pulled to her feet with surprising strength by Glinda. The stick user's vision blurred a little with the rush of getting pulled to her feet. As she rubbed her head, she looked up at the professor questioningly. But I still have a lot to improve on, right? A small smile came over the woman's lips. Mr. Moore, everyone can always learn more and strive to improve, and I know you can because you've improved greatly over the last week alone. She looked to the harness in the brunette's hands. You've given yourself something to focus your talents through, and you've heeded my advice by preparing a strategy and adapting to the changes along the way. That's what a huntress should be doing. Goodwitch's words made Tenten feel better, but her loss still weighed heavy even after everything she had done that week. She looked down at her batons. I think you were absolutely fantastic, Tenten. She looked up from her weapons and saw Pyrrha smiling at her in delight at her quick growth. She praised her friend for the exciting battle. That was one of the best fights I've ever had, and you were amazing. That was amazing, Tenten. You were so cool. Way to go, Tamura. Tenten looked around and saw the crowd of students start to clap and cheer even after she had been beaten. The brunette looked around in silence as she spotted her team and friends making the most noise for her efforts. Most of them were clapping and jumping on their feet, while even Blake and Weiss were applauding her showing. Tenten smiled and she felt something fell up in the corners of her eyes before wiping it away. You two can head back to your seats now, Glinda said as she wiped their profiles from the screens and stood at the center to begin the next randomizing process. Tenten grabbed her carry bag and slipped her scrimma back in before making her way back to the lockers. Hunting. Oh crap! Tenten droned as she just stared at her locker in blank confusion. Her mouth opened and closed periodically as she raked her brain. What the hell was her locker combination again? She never had a weapon she had to keep locked up before, so it sort of sucked. Oh, her birthday, duh. That really was a very good fight, Tenten. She looked over to see Pyrrha walking over after depositing her sword and shield. She sat on the bench behind her and placed her hands in her laps. In my opinion, I think you fought even better than you did earlier this week. Tenten smiled proudly before she finished typing in her combo and opening up the locker. She spared her warrior friend a smile. Even though you held back, Pyrrha shook her head. I can promise you, Tenten, that I did not hold back at all in our fight. Tenten grinned happily at that admission as she played with the bag in her hands. Even if she did lose again, knowing she had gotten stronger and others were proud of her achievement, and even getting the champion to take her seriously in a fight felt good. Plus, she had her new weapons. How did you figure out my semblance was polarity? Nobody told me, if that's what you were wondering. Tenten assured the redhead in case she thought her secret ability was being spilled to other people. Tenten closed and opened her fist a few times for emphasis. I just felt a weird tug on my hands when I tried to hit you in our last fight, and I started racking my brain to figure out what that was. Then I remembered the first few times I activated my semblance as a kid. I got a magnet stuck to my forehead, and it reminded me of that feeling. She saw Pyrrha giggle a little at the funny story. I won't tell anyone about your polarity if you don't want me to. Thank you, Pyrrha said gratefully before her eyes landed on the bag carrying the new weapon that had given her such a push. When did you get those? And Tenten hung the bag and sticks on the hook and closed the door before turning to sit down beside Pyrrha. I just finished making them yesterday. Yesterday. She looked between Tenten and her locker in stunned shock. You only finished making those weapons yesterday? And Tenten nodded, and the mystical champion looked so blindsided by that fact as she shook her head in disbelief. Tenten, that's outstanding. If you had more time to practice and train with them, then I'm certain you would have performed even better in our match. The brunette shrugged. Maybe, but I'm already used to fighting with sticks. Plus, I was just so excited and nervous about using them that I wanted to get some actual combat experience to see how they felt. Tenten leaned back on her arms and let her feet roll on the marble. It's actually a stupid, simple design, and I haven't been able to alter the mechanisms inside, so I can use the samples that don't burn up so quickly, but since it's so simple, I can customize it in the future. Well, that's a useful advantage to prepare for, Pyrrha said as the two girls laughed lightly. The champion looked over at the locker. Do they have a name? Khalid and Bulge, and Tenten answered. One of Ruby's family friends suggested it, and I loved it. She grinned and laughed a little in joy as her legs bounced with excitement. I finally have my own weapons. I'm happy for you, Tenten, the redhead offered up before she felt compelled to ask. But what made you want to create a weapon now over any other time? Because of you, mostly. The Juniper woman sat up in mild surprise and looked at her for an explanation. Tenten stood out of her seat and started slowly pacing around the locker room as the background noise of cheers and other people fighting run through the walls. The bunny-haired girl stepped around lightly and spoke up to the Amazon. I've been thinking a lot lately about why I wanted to become a huntress, and, well, I guess I wanted to do it to be well known and strong like so many other people, so many other great people in history. And when I was training to become a huntress, the person I idolized the most was you. You were around my age, but you were so strong and competent and wonderful, and I thought if someone my age could do that, maybe I could too. Pyrrha smiled at Tenten's words as a mix of emotion came over her face. She felt a nasty twist of pride, despair, loneliness, and awkwardness at hearing her friends speak about the same kind of idolization she had heard so many times. Her eyes lowered as she kept her small smile up to encourage Tenten to keep thinking she was this great, unflappable hero she believed in. But I know it's not that easy even for you, right? Pyrrha's mixed mask broke as her eyes slowly widened and she looked up to see Tenten standing over her. Huh? It's not easy even for you, Tenten reiterated as she scratched her cheek timidly at addressing the topic she was only speculating on. I mean, I'm not totally sure, but when I see you now, I don't see the perfect skilled warrior I always thought you were. I mean, you're still awesome and strong, but you're also just a regular girl. Tenten smiled and laughed a little. I see a girl that gets all flustered when she's embarrassed and excited when something cool happens, and someone that tries to get Nora to stay on track doing something, but has a hard time trying to get her to listen. And then when I see you fight, I realize that you can do everything you do because you worked hard too. You didn't just win those fights by luck or fate. You won them because you tried and fought with the best of your ability. Tenten leaned against the locker and smiled at Pyrrha. You can do everything you do because you tried so hard, and I admire you even more now because I know great hunters and I feel myself being motivated to do the same now too. Way more than I did back when I just watched through a screen, so I wanted to become better and stronger, and now that I have my weapons, I feel like I can actually do that too. I'm gonna become a huntress thanks to all of my friends, and thanks to you too. Tenten gave a big grin and laughed a little, because even though you were cool as my idol, I think you are much cooler and more amazing as my friend. Tenten opened her eyes again and was taken aback at the sight. She seemed worried and scared as she muttered, Pyrrha, yes? Are you okay? Tenten was panicked as she pointed to her own eyes. You're? Pyrrha raised her hands and felt the tears coming down from her eyes before she gasped a little. She quickly rubbed her eyes to rid herself of the tears as Tenten stuttered and impaled and worried. I'm sorry, Pyrrha. I didn't know what I was saying. I'm sorry. No. Pyrrha shook her head. No, I'm sorry. Her eyes were dry but still a little red and puffy. I didn't mean to make you worry, but everything's fine. You didn't say anything wrong. But then why are you crying? Tenten still wasn't convinced as she became anxious and nervous that she may have hurt the redhead's feelings. If I say something I shouldn't have, then I'm really sorry. Tenten. Pyrrha finished drying her eyes and slowly stood up in front of Tenten. The blonde-haired girl looked up at her to see a beautiful and happy smile on her face. Pyrrha nodded towards her to relay she was okay. I'm really happy you became my friend. The narcotics fighter blinked up at her in confusion before she realized what she said and nodded as well. I'm really happy you're my friend too. Pyrrha laughed a little and then took a deep breath to calm herself down. She passed the brunette and motioned to the exit. We should probably start heading back. The others are most likely waiting to congratulate us after our fight. Oh, don't you think they'll be wondering why your eyes are so red? Oh, I'm sure it will be okay. She stopped and looked back to Tenten expectantly. Come on, they'll want to hear how you made Khalid and Bulge work so well. You can't leave your audience waiting. Tenten smirked and jogged over to walk alongside the champion to make their way back to their teams. In this fight, Pyrrha had been smacked, electrocuted, nearly frozen, and partly exploded by an onslaught of different abilities and attacks, and despite her efforts and determination, Tenten still had a long way to go before she could beat the mythical champion in a fight. Yet, despite these facts, it was the best fight either of these girls had had in a long time, and most fun too. End of chapter 28.